Okay, well, hello everybody. If we haven't met before, my name's Catherine. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you to this Church Urban Fund online session this morning. We're going to be exploring together how we can grow our church and community by connecting the dots between social action, discipleship and growth through our free Growing Good course. So this is part of a series of webinars. We've got another one coming up in April about praying together, and one looking at volunteering, and particularly difficulties that we might encounter working with volunteers. So those are the dates for the future webinars, and you can see those and sign up for those on the Church Urban Fund website. So first of all, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The session is being recorded, but please note that your faces won't actually be visible on the recording. The recording will be made available afterwards. We'll be sending it out to you and also putting it on our website so that you can direct others to it, people who can't be here today. As we're going through the session, questions are bound to come to mind. We're inviting you to put those into the chat, and then towards the end, we'll have some time to look at those questions. So that's the, and also you are all muted at the moment, so please keep yourself on mute for the time being. Thank you. So anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Polly Taylor, who's a colleague at Church Urban Fund, and she's helped to develop the Growing Good Toolkit. She's continued to be involved in sharing it with churches. The toolkit was launched in October 2020, and since then 2,000 people have signed up to access it. Today we'll be hearing from people who've used the toolkit and also hear about the difference it's made. So over to Polly.
Thanks, Catherine, and it's good to see so many people here today. I know some people will be here because they're planning to use Growing Good during Lent, and others will be here just to find out more and decide whether they might use the resources at some point with their church. So I hope this session will answer some of the questions that you might have and give you the confidence to run the toolkit in your church. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I'll introduce you to the resources. We'll have a short time for discussion in breakout rooms, and I'll give you some more information and guidance on how to access and use the resources. And we'll also hear, as Catherine said, from a couple of church leaders about their experience of using the Growing Good Toolkit, and we'll finish with time for some questions. So there's a lot to get through, so we'll get started. The Growing Good Toolkit is a 6-session free course for churches that was developed by Church Urban Fund. It's based on 3 years of research into what enables churches to flourish and develop connections with their wider community, and connections that can lead to positive practical action and to people joining the church. And we recently did an evaluation of Growing Good that showed that it helps churches to grow in these 3 ways. It helps them grow in knowledge about their community and their congregation, particularly in knowledge about the gifts and skills in the congregation and the resources and opportunities and potential partnerships in the community, as well as the needs that might be present. It helps churches to grow in confidence for local mission. And this confidence seems to grow out of knowing themselves and their community better, reflecting on their calling as the people of God, and also from acknowledging and celebrating what they're already doing, as well as generating ideas for new activities. And it helps churches grow in relationships and hospitality, which leads to new connections, both with individuals and with other local organisations. And these connections are based on knowledge and confidence and lead to the development of a culture of participation and invitation. The toolkit is flexible and adaptable. Rather than being prescriptive, it provides a framework for conversations about your context, about your church and your community. And the sessions include a mixture of content that hopefully appeal to lots of different learning styles, including videos, activities, discussions, and questions that encourage everyone in the group to contribute. And we often hear from people who've used the toolkit sessions that the focus on local knowledge and personal experience really encourages those who don't usually have a voice to speak up and to participate. We're now going to watch a short film that will give you an overview of the Growing Good Toolkit content. In the film, you'll meet the two presenters who present all the session videos, and they are Bishop Lynn Collins and Reverend Lauren Simpson. They'll tell you about the research and the themes that underpin the resources. And then after this, we'll look at the sessions in a bit more detail. And as I said, we'll spend some time in breakout rooms having some discussion. So we're now going to watch the introductory film. It's about 4 minutes long.
During the pandemic, our communities and our churches changed dramatically. Our buildings were closed and public worship was suspended for the first time in 800 years. We were forced to rethink church, and that brought tremendous challenges, but it also brought tremendous opportunities. Many churches got stuck in with community groups and partnered with local authorities to deliver food to vulnerable people. We built new relationships in our local communities and offered prayer via phone to people alone at home. The church and its faith in God wasn't visible in church buildings or on Sunday mornings, but it was alive in food banks, community garden projects, WhatsApp groups, and Zoom calls every single day of the week.
For many churches, life during the pandemic brought social action and discipleship much closer together. And this raised the question, shouldn't it always be this way? Jesus said the two greatest commandments are to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbours as ourselves. Loving God is inseparable from loving our neighbours, and it's through experiencing love that people are drawn to becoming new disciples of Jesus Christ. Social action brings the church into relationship with people we might not otherwise meet. These relationships can lead to church growth as people connect with church and our faith in God through social action. These relationships can also deepen discipleship as volunteers grow in prayer, faith, generosity, and commitment to justice.
The Growing Good Toolkit is designed to help churches connect the dots between social action and discipleship and growth. But what do we mean by social action? There are many ways that churches take part in social action: befriending neighbours or joining a residents' association, co-hosting a lunch club or hosting a budgeting course in the village hall, running a food bank or a toddler group, or partnering with local businesses to throw a summer street party. Church social action should be distinct. As Theos and Church Urban Fund remind us, it's relational because the focus is building genuine relationships, not just providing services. It's incarnational because it emphasizes being part of a community, just like Jesus became part of humanity. And it's spiritual because our social action is motivated by the love of God. It's part of our discipleship as we make evident the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
What do we mean by discipleship? Disciple means learner. Discipleship is not a program, It's not just for an elite group of Christians. It's open to anyone who wants to learn from Jesus. It's a lifelong process of following Jesus Christ and growing in his image. And what do we mean by church growth? It has to be holistic. Yes, we mean growth in numbers, but we also mean growth in faithfulness, maturity, diversity and service. We want our churches to be places where people of all backgrounds can belong, contribute and encounter Jesus Christ in word, sacrament and each other.
The Growing Good Toolkit is for churches who want to grow in faithfulness and fruitfulness. Our hope is that this toolkit will help you to connect social action, discipleship and growth in your own context.
The toolkit is based on 3 years of research by Theos and Church Urban Fund. Our researchers interviewed more than 350 people in nearly 70 churches across England. They looked at the ways that churches are growing through their social action. They found some common themes in churches which are growing. These are presence, perseverance, hospitality, adaptability and participation. We've built the Growing Good Toolkit sessions around each of these themes. Each session has a Bible reflection, a short film, a group activity and a space for prayer. We hope the toolkit will help you learn from Scripture and other churches and inspire you to make a difference in your own community. After exploring the 5 themes, we've also built in a Next Steps session to help you reflect on the things you've learned, explore other resources and think more about what your church could do next. You can do all 6 sessions or you can pick the themes which are most relevant to your church context right now.
We pray that the Spirit would guide you, inspiring and equipping you for faithfulness and fruitfulness. Thank you for joining us in this journey of growing good.
So apologies there if there were a few issues with the video. I promise you that doesn't actually reflect the actual quality of the films within the sessions. It's just that sometimes these videos don't come across very well over Zoom. But I hope that gives you a flavour of Growing Good. And if you run the course, we encourage you to share this film with your group before or at the start of the first session so they understand a bit of the background to the toolkit resources. And we heard in the film that the toolkit is based on 3 years of research that included 70 churches across England. And the researchers looked at ways that churches are growing through their social action. And as you heard, they found some common themes or characteristics. And these are presence, perseverance, hospitality and generosity, adaptability and participation. And we built the Growing Good Toolkit to help church groups reflect on each of these themes. So I'll just take a few minutes to talk about each of these in turn before we go into breakout groups. So starting with presence, the research found that the church grows in number and depth when it is present and visible and connected to its local area. And we don't just mean the presence, the physical presence of the church through its buildings, we also mean its presence through networks of relationships, through the presence of its members in the community, and increasingly through its online presence. And of course, we mean through its social action. Closely linked to presence is perseverance. The research found that growth often occurs after years of focused activity or engagement, and that it's about investing in people and institutions over the long term, even when it's hard and slow. And it's also about reflecting on Christian discipleship as a lifelong journey. The third characteristic is hospitality. And the research found that hospitality was incredibly significant for church growth, especially when hospitality was offered in a way that genuinely communicated a willingness to engage with community as it is, and also where the church is also willing to model the example of Jesus in receiving hospitality as well as offering it. Adaptability is also about meeting the community as it is. It's about being adaptable and embracing life's complexities. It's about being open to challenge and change, and it's about learning how to integrate people of different ages, cultures, and backgrounds into the life of the church. And finally, participation. The research found that building or intentionally building a culture of participation in social action and in other forms of community engagement also offered a practical route into faith for people who weren't previously part of the church community and might not have considered exploring faith before. It's also a way in which people deepen an existing faith. So Church Urban Fund developed the Growing Good Toolkit to help churches reflect on these 5 themes. The first 5 sessions of the course look at each of these themes in turn, and then the final next step session brings it all together. So we're going to pause here for a short time of discussion in breakout rooms. And if Catherine, you bring up the next slide, we'll see the question that I'm suggesting we look at together. So thinking about those 5 themes, presence, perseverance, hospitality, adaptability, and participation, which of these do you identify with? Which has your church found it easiest to develop, and which have been or continue to be more challenging? And do you have any examples? So in your groups, if you could discuss those 2 questions, which of the themes do you recognise? Which do you think your church has found it easiest to develop? Which are more challenging, and can you give any examples? And we'll have 5 minutes to discuss this question, and then we'll come back together. Welcome back. I hope that that was encouraging and helpful as you shared with each other some of the ways in which you already see some of those characteristics and themes present within your church, and that it may also have generated some ideas. And if there's any particular questions or comments that time of discussion has brought up, then you can put those in the chat, and we'll look at those when we come to our time for questions at the end of the session. But we're going to move on now to look at how you access and use the toolkit, and to look at a session overview. So we're looking here at the session guide for the hospitality session, but all the sessions in the toolkit follow the same format. Once you create an account, all the course materials are available to you online, including the session guides, the films, and links to other useful resources. The session guide is for the course leader, although some people find it useful to print out an extra copy, for example, if they're going to ask somebody else to read the Bible reading, or they're going to split into smaller groups for the time of discussion. That's up to you. And just to say, in terms of using the films can be viewed from the website, or through links to YouTube, or you can download them. For example, if you needed to show them in a venue where you didn't have Wi-Fi, you could download the film and show it from your device. Each session lasts about 90 minutes, and all the sessions start with an opening question that is to get people thinking about the theme. Then there's a scripture reading with some context, followed by some discussion questions. And then the group watches a case study film. In this case, for the hospitality session, it's a film that looks at the story of a community cafe in a town in Kent that's run by a group of churches. And some of the volunteers from the cafe reflect on what hospitality means for them and for that project. Following the case study film, there's then an activity, and I'll talk a bit more about the activities in a minute, or there's further questions for discussion that bring together the opening question, the Bible reading, the film. Then there's a closing prayer and some suggested takeaway actions. You could, of course, adapt the format and make the session longer or shorter, depending on the time that you have. Or, for example, you could extend the time of prayer if that's part of the normal practice for your group. The takeaway actions at the end of each session are optional, but they'll always include something simple that an individual could do. In the case of the hospitality session, that's simply spending time with somebody over a cup of tea or coffee. And then there's also what you might think of as an extension activity, which is something that the group could research. It might take a bit more time, might be something that the group does together at another time. In this case, it's finding out more about the Places of Welcome network, which is a network that CUF supports, a network of 800 free spaces offering community and connection. So that's a quick overview of the session format. And then if we move on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of the activities and tools that are part of the sessions or part of the takeaway actions or optional extra activities. So starting with the presence session, the present session includes a neighbourhood mapping activity where the group gathers around a map of the local area and they look at things like the location of the church building, where church members live, and where the other local facilities and institutions within the community are, such as schools, parks, pubs, community centres, shops. The prayer walk guide is offered as an optional extra activity because it's a good way of actually getting out and getting to know your local area and noticing things in your local area whilst praying for the community at the same time. So some groups might want to do the prayer walk after the present session as an extension activity to the neighbourhood mapping that they've done in the session. And the takeaway activity for the present session is to have a look at the lookup tool, which is a tool on the CUF website that compares data on poverty statistics for every parish in England. The perseverance session has an activity where the group considers what they might learn from other local institutions. So this is all about pre-existing local knowledge. It's nothing that the group will need to prepare for. It's knowledge that the group already has. So it's looking at other institutions in the community that have had a long-term presence and what the church might learn from those. So that might be a school, a pub, or a local business. Head, heart, hands. Some people may have come across this before. It's a simple exercise for identifying your own gifts and the gifts of the people around you. And that is part of the participation session. So it's almost like doing a mini gifts and skills audit. And it looks at gifts of the head. So what do you know? Gifts of the heart, what are your passions? And gifts of the hands, what can you do? And how you might offer those in service of your neighbours and your community. I've already mentioned that the hospitality session introduces the Places of Welcome network. The adaptability session includes what we call a church life audit, which makes it sound a bit more complicated than it actually is. It's really just a discussion about who is involved in the different areas of church life and how you might include more people. So again, it's about pre-existing knowledge and different perspectives that different members of the group might bring to that conversation. And in the next step session, we have included some tools and ideas for helping your group filter the ideas that they might have come up with through using Growing Good, and also some tips for creating an action plan and sharing your ideas with the church leadership and the wider church. And then finally, we recently developed 3 additional case study films that look at some more specific contexts. So we have got a film that is about a church in a very rural context, a film of a church that has no building, and a film of a church on an inner urban estate which is an area of higher deprivation. And we developed those films in response to some of the feedback that we've had, where there were churches that didn't recognise themselves in the existing session case study films. and we thought we could offer something to them that would be more relatable. So those are some of the activities and tools that your group will have access to as part of the Growing Good Toolkit. Catherine, if we can bring up the next slide. So we designed the toolkit to be as easy and flexible to use as possible, and to be useful to churches in different contexts of different traditions and with different groups. And one of the aspects that group leaders tell us they really like about the toolkit is that they can download a session and they can run it with very little preparation. However, since launching 4 years ago, we've had feedback from group leaders that have used the toolkit, and we've reflected some of their feedback in the updates that we've made to the material and to the resources. And this includes a new training hub for leaders, which we launched last year. And this has short videos covering all aspects of the course material, how to prepare for a session, and top tips from churches that have used the course. So the training hub is a great place to get started, for tips on how to prepare sessions and how you could adapt the material to use with your group. All the videos are very short, between 2 and 4 minutes long, and we also provide transcripts of each of the videos if you'd rather read the transcript rather than watch the video. We move on to the next slide. So how can you use the toolkit in your church? So first of all, you'll need to sign up. Go to the Growing Good website. The website address is on the bottom of this slide. There's a sign up button, and we just ask for a small amount of information, your name, your email address, the name of your church, and a postcode. And then you'll be able to create an account, which means you'll be able to go in and out of the toolkit website to access the sessions and all the course material. Then I would suggest that you visit the training hub. As I said, that will guide you through preparing to use the toolkit and give you some tips on using it. You can use all 6 sessions as a course. That's the way in which the material was designed to be used, but actually the sessions have also been designed to stand alone. So you don't have to use all 6. You could pick 2 or 3. You could pick the themes that were most relevant to your group and use those, and maybe come back to the others at a later date. The course works best with a small group or a house group. However, we do know that it's successfully been used with groups of churches or teams of churches or across deaneries. And you might just need to put a bit more thought into preparing for the sessions if you're looking at a wider geographical area where you've got different parishes or different church geographies involved. We know of some churches that haven't run it as a course, rather they've used the themes and they've used the material to create content for Sunday services. So some churches have taken the theme, the Bible passage and the case study film, and they've built a service around these, sometimes with a sermon or sometimes with a more informal time of discussion within the context of a Sunday service. We know of churches that have used the Growing Good Toolkit for mission action planning, especially as a way of getting more people to contribute to the beginning of that process. So hearing more voices at the beginning of a mission action planning process. And some churches have used it during a vacancy or interregnum, or with a new leader after they have taken up a new post. And we know of churches that have used Growing Good with their leadership team, with their PCC, or with groups of volunteers, especially with groups of volunteers who might be involved in a specific project or area of ministry within the church. So, for example, there was a church in Stockport who wanted to start a new weekly hot meal service. And they had a group of volunteers who were very keen to get going with that, and they ran the hospitality session with that group so that they could discuss how they were going to offer hospitality to the people who were coming to the hot meal service and what that meant for them as a group, and so that they could build a shared understanding around that. So moving on to impact. So far, over 600 churches have used the toolkit, and last year we asked some of them about the impact it had had on them and on their community. And we talked about these outcomes at the beginning. It helped churches to grow in knowledge about the community, it helped them grow in confidence for local mission, and it helped them grow in hospitality and relationships. And these areas of growth have led to some further next steps. We can look at the next slide. So further next steps that churches told us about were that Growing Good had encouraged them to be more visibly and actively present in their community. So we've heard about churches tidying up their church grounds, or adding a bench in the churchyard or on the pavement outside the church, indicating that the church is open by opening both their doors on a Sunday morning, or if it's practical, opening their doors when there's an activity going on in the church during the week, or having coffee after church outside, again, being more visibly present, going on prayer walks around the local area, joining local Facebook groups, starting community litter picks, and hosting or participating in outdoor community celebrations. So lots of examples and lots of simple ways in which churches have intentionally tried to be more visible and active in the community. We've heard about churches adapting their space or their worship to be more welcoming and inclusive. So this is sometimes including inviting volunteers from local community projects to come to a special service of celebration and inviting them to talk about their local project or their local organisation. It's also included churches adding songs for children or teaching songs in different languages that reflect more of the diversity within their congregation, or simply simplifying the language that they're using in services so it's more accessible. We know that churches have used Growing Good to help them plan for mission, and this has included things like incorporating opportunities for discipleship into midweek outreach activities. It might be praying at the beginning of a social action project, being more outward focused and being more intentional about inviting people to be part of what's going on in and through the church. And finally, there have been churches that have started new projects through engaging with Growing Good. For example, the evaluation report features a church near Hull that started a monthly free pop-up cafe. They're in a community where there were no places for people to come and meet each other. I also spoke to a church in the last week that have started an after-school club as a result of using Growing Good, and have developed a new partnership with one of their local schools. So I hope that has encouraged you and helped you begin to think about how could you use Growing Good. Before we have time for questions, we're going to hear from two church leaders that have used Growing Good and hear how Growing Good helped their churches. Firstly, we're going to hear from Reverend Eleanor King, who is the vicar of a multi-benefice in rural Somerset. And then we'll hear from Reverend Dan Scott, who is the vicar of a new church in East London.
My name's Eleanor. I'm the incumbent of Quantock Village's benefice, which Goathurst is part of. Goathurst Church is part of. So it's one of the churches that I look after. It was one of the church wardens who found the course. I mean, to me, that's significant that he came to me and said, could we do it? So we did it in 2022, so 2 years ago, not long after the pandemic. So we were learning to be together again. we took it in somebody's house and various people facilitated it. It was a good conversation starter. The questions are fairly straightforward at the beginning, so you have this conversation. And actually it did lead to an action plan, which we are still going at. You know, that wonderful sense, the welcome, I remember, just show up. So we were encouraging people just to show up. The coffee morning that was quarterly is now every month. So that wonderfully brings the community together. So that's a real growing thing. And in terms of adaptability, she was the church warden himself, has written a quiz for children. It's a community with not a lot of children, but that is written, and a lot more welcome. The welcome to people coming in has improved, but they've done quite a lot in terms of brochures and just welcoming, but they've done it themselves. And I think this is a hugely important thing about rural community, that it is involving the lay. I can't be in every church at every time, but looking for the people, God's gifts in people, and saying, you know, how can we use that? How can we encourage that? And I think that's going to be very much the way forward.
We were invited about 4 years ago to start Christchurch 3 Mills in this end of the parish of St John's in Stratford. We moved into the estate about 3 years ago. So at Christchurch 3 Mills, we used the Growing Good course over Lent. We ran it at Tuesday lunchtime and a Thursday evening with 2 different groups that we had. And we just found it incredibly encouraging to hear the stories of others who were just, it felt like, doing simple things to connect with their community and to connect their community to faith. And the way that it didn't overemphasize one or the other between social action and evangelism, but actually said we can be people who care for our communities as a whole. I remember particularly that first video in Hoxton about presence and about a church that was just faithfully and slowly being present to its community. And we reflected on that as a church about where are we present. Obviously we don't have a big building that stands, but actually we were reflecting on the many ways that we are present. And what that course also did is inspired voices that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been heard to say, oh, well, what if we could do this? We had one idea that we would approach a local storefront that was closed. That hasn't led anywhere yet, but it was the willingness of people to suggest that. And actually out of that course also came a deeper desire to listen to our community. And so because we ran the Growing Good course over Lent at Easter, we've now become members of Citizens UK. We're now working with the Centre for Theology and Community and taking their learning community and congregational development. And I remember the person who initially said, doing that Growing Good course, we need to listen to our community, is now one of the people taking a lead in our work with community organising and seeing how we can be people who listen to our community and play our part in seeing this community flourish.
Great. So we've now got about 5 to 10 minutes for any questions. I'm going to invite my colleagues Liz and Catherine to join me. So I think they've been looking at whether there have been any questions in the chat while I've been talking. But I think we'll also take questions if people want to raise a hand at this point as well.
So I can tell you we haven't had any questions as yet, except somebody said, can it be run online? And I replied in the chat, yes, it can be run online, although of course it would need a bit of adapting because it does imagine that you're all around a table looking at a map. So you might have to put a map on the screen or something and say, you know, can you see where there's significant places in our area and things like that. But it could be run online. And in fact, I think it has been, hasn't it?
It has been run online. And there are some tips in the training, in one of the Training Hub videos, there are some specific tips about how you could run it online. And some of the things you'd have to think about, as Liz was saying, in advance to make it work online.
One thing I don't think's been clearly said is everything is free. So not just the actual course itself, but all the extra materials and all the extra resources and all the extra case studies. It's all completely free to download.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many churches have used it, Polly. How many churches would you say?
About 600.
Yeah. So it's been very well accessed.
Yeah.
And there's lots of experience of churches as to look at. And if you need advice, there's quite a lot of advice as well, isn't there, on the website about how to run the sessions and experience of other groups that have done it and helpful things to think about.
And once you sign up, you'll be given the opportunity to contact us directly. So if you want to have a short conversation on the phone or over Zoom, you'll be sent a link which will enable you to kind of book a slot if you want to have a bit more of a conversation with us about using it with your church. You can just see that somebody's added to the chat that they've just used the lookup tool and found it helpful. That's great. Yeah, we would definitely encourage you to have a look at the lookup tool. It's not just part of the Growing Good course. It's available to anybody who wants to know more about the poverty statistics in their parish or their area, and to look at their kind of relative ranking really across the country. Catherine, could you put a link to that, the lookup tool, in the chat, so that people can go there directly if they want to? Joe, are you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an observation really. So within the churches that I look after, we work very closely with young farmers, and young farmers' interests. They're very outward looking. They're very ethical. They like to be very present in our community. And I'm just wondering off the top of my head, is this a tool that we could potentially work on together without it necessarily being particularly missional for ourselves, but outward looking for both of us? And do you think the tool could be adapted on that basis?
I do think, I think there are some of the activities like the neighbourhood mapping, the sort of looking at other organisations, what you can learn from them and their longevity. The sort of the congregational audit could be adapted for a different type of organisation. Obviously, yeah, there's a lot, obviously Growing Good is based on sort of Christian mission and Christian mission principles, and the course material has got Bible study within it that would have to be adapted. But yeah, I think it definitely would work for different organizations.
I think it's good to say though that there is a very strong thread through it of what does the Bible say, what does Jesus say, and so for example, hospitality, it kicks off with, well, when have you been made to feel welcome? What does it mean to be welcoming? Then it leads into, well, what does Jesus say about welcome? And what does Jesus say about fairness and hospitality and sharing? And the film talks about what's the theology behind hospitality, generosity, and the grace of God. So it is very specifically Christian, but because we allow you to just download it and adapt it as you wish, I'm sure there are things in it that anybody could use if they wish to, if you're prepared to just go through and adapt it. Yeah. But it is very much about mission, I suppose I would say. But I think what's good about it is it's not saying what you've been done before, what you're doing now isn't good enough and you all ought to be doing a lot more. It's actually saying, what are we doing now that's really good? And can we celebrate that? And can we change it a little bit so it's a bit more impactful? For example, we have coffee at the end, but we all go into another room and half the people leave. So shall we not have coffee in the main building and everybody will take part? Really simple things that could make a big impact.
Yeah. Then somebody's asked, could some of the discussions be integrated into a PCC meeting? Yes, definitely. We know of churches that have used Growing Good with their PCC. You obviously might not want, your PCC may be reluctant to meet for an additional 6 extra sessions, but you could definitely incorporate some of the discussions into a PCC meeting, and then maybe also encourage the PCC to consider running the full 6 sessions at another point and inviting other members of the congregation to join in with that. And I think that was one of the things that stood out to me from some of the feedback we had, was that Growing Good seems to really enable other people to speak and for different voices to be heard. And I think that's really important, particularly, as I said, at the beginning of a mission planning process, or when you're talking about mission, is to hear lots of different voices and perspectives, and for people who may not always feel that they have a voice, to be given the opportunity to speak up. And that's partly because, as I've said, a lot of the questions and the discussions and the activities are based on prior knowledge. It's the knowledge that you have as a member of the local community and a member of the local church, rather than something more intellectual that you may not have encountered before.
Polly, somebody's asked, can it be used in Liberia?
Absolutely. I think the idea is that it would work in any context, because it's about your local context. It's not prescriptive. You would have to maybe look at the material in more detail, and certainly the films you might want to look at to check that, you know, they were relatable, but certainly the material could be used in different places.
Polly, somebody's asked, our church has a large staff team. Can we have a shared login to access the toolkit and store the downloads in a central location?
I guess that's really up to you. We wouldn't be able to provide like a multi-user login, but if you've got a login,
if you set it up, you
and an
can
email
just
address,
share it
yeah,
with each
and
other,
share,
can't
that's
you?
fine. Yeah, and you don't need to store the well, you could store the downloads, but if you've got a login, you can go in and out at any time. So just to say, finally, if you have other questions, please do get in touch directly with me or with Cuff. As I said, sign up to access Growing Good via the Growing Good website. And if you do use the toolkit, we would really love to hear from you, to hear about how it went and whether you have any feedback and what the impact was. Over to you, Catherine.
Whilst we're just doing that, Polly, there's just another question, which is, does it work without the vicar going along?
Absolutely. Lots of groups have used it without their church leader being present. And that's why in the next step session, we provide some ideas for sharing what you've discussed with the church leadership and the wider church, so that you can take your ideas and your reflections to the vicar or the church leader or the PCC after you've finished the course. But yeah, I mean, it works fine without a church leader present.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Polly. So we're coming to the end of our session. Before we go, I'm going to launch a quick poll where you should be able to click on answers. It'd be really great if you could just do that before you go. And also you can see here on the screen some further resources that might be helpful. These are, if you go into the CUF website, we've got a resources tab, and there you can see the lookup tool, the Growing Good here again. But also in here, we've also got, our previous webinars as well. So do have a look there, and also do consider, as I said at the beginning, signing up for the other webinars in this series. So I'll just launch the poll now. We've come to the end now, so please do continue with the poll. I'll keep it there for a moment, but I just want to say a big thank you to Polly for this session. As we said at the beginning, we'll be sending around a recording probably next week, so you'll be able to listen back to the session and share it with others. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got any other questions. So thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.